Hello everyone. I want to talk about something that's important to me. Before I get into that, I would like to first explain to you why I talk about Manjaro as often as I do on this channel. I learned a lot of things in my adult years, specifically when it comes to corporations. When it comes to corporations, they like to take advantage of you as much as possible. They also like to take advantage of opportunities as much as possible. Case in point with Windows. The thing with Windows is that Microsoft knows if they make it as simple as possible, then people are going to continue using it. That's taking advantage of an opportunity. They recognize that people don't want to learn. So they're going to do whatever they can to weasel their way in and get a foothold. They are also taking advantage of not just you, but also a lot of other people and companies. You see, there isn't really any laws against monopolies with software. There is rules against monopolies with internet service providers, but not really with software. So Microsoft can go unchallenged as much as they want to because there has been a lack of challenge for a number of years to where now they've accumulated so many resources, it's going to be hard to dislodge them. I think they own, 23 game studios? I can Google it if I need to, but they own 23 game studios, DirectX, Azure Labs, and a couple other things I could probably list, all of which have been used in games for a number of years. It's going to continue being that way because of the reasons that I just gave. So that's sort of the reasonings behind why I do what I do with my channel. It's because I recognize that I need to do my part as a technology person to raise awareness to these issues. I also recognize it should be an obligation of mine to change it as much as possible. The market is not going to change unless there's user base. So I'm doing my part by gaming on Manjaro as much as possible, so I am one person added to those statistics for whenever companies think about investing into Linux gaming. I really do want that to happen because I want diversity in the market. I'm tired of Microsoft. I'm tired of their greed. And I'm sure other people are as well. So, there's my reasonings. But don't think that I'm a Linux fan at any point. I'm not. I'm doing it because it's a necessity. But I will say that the experience has been good overall gaming on Manjaro. Okay, with that said, let's talk about the news now. It's been up on the screen for a while, but the short version is Nvidia DLSS technology is coming to Linux and also Steam. So let me explain why this is a big news. DLSS is proprietary technology. It's owned by Nvidia. It's not licensed out to anybody as far as I know. When it comes to giving proprietary software or hardware to open sourced software, that's where a lot of legal conflicts tend to happen because of the open nature of the operating system. There's always a chance for that technology to be reverse engineered, stolen, or what have you. Well, it's that way with anything, but with open source software, it's a higher chance. So Nvidia is not only investing a lot of money into this, but they're also taking a very big risk by exposing their proprietary technology to an open source software. So what is DLSS? Well, short version, it's a deep learning sampling thing. It's basically what helps the video card perform certain functions or features that NVIDIA intended for those video cards. A lot of people are probably using it right now as we speak. I would have to look at statistics to confirm that, but nonetheless, it's a technology coming to open source software. So yes, it's a very big investment, and also a big risk from NVIDIA. Before NVIDIA, it was Steam/Valve that was supporting Linux gaming through Proton software. I actually have it up in one of the tabs here. I'll go and tab over real quickly. So before NVIDIA came along, Proton was really the only company support that Linux had. Easy AntiCheat was there, but Easy AntiCheat couldn't support Linux because of the games that it was incorporated in. We'll get into that in a minute. But Short version is Proton is what allows Linux to play Steam games through different layers of software and things of that nature. So this is the website for Proton. I've linked it before on my channel. You can see all the statistics in terms of what works and what doesn't on Linux gaming. You can also search in the top left to see which games work there. So if you have a game that you want to see if it works on Linux, you can do it here. And if it doesn't work through Proton, you also have Lutris. Lutris is basically what came before Proton. Lutris is community driven, so really the backbone of Linux gaming, or at least what's got it started, is the community. The community created Linux, the community upkept Linux, they made Lutris, they upkept Lutris, and they continued to make a drive for games to work on wine/Lutris. So we've had an evolution from community to now company support. Let me go and talk about easy anti-cheat so we can tie that in with this. Easy anti-cheat is used in games such as, let me think, it's Paladins, Smite, Fortnite, and a couple others. So while easy anti-cheat does work on Linux, and actually easy cheat did confirm this themselves because they made a statement about this, but it works on Linux, and the reason it isn't used on Linux is because it's blocked from doing so. You see, the reason that we know easy anti-cheat works is because when they made their statement, it was in response to Fortnite. Some people were asking Fortnite to come to Linux for gaming. Well, sure enough, it turns out that Epic Games blocks easy anti-cheat from opening its services to Linux. So, there is technically a third company, or third now company support, but it's just being blocked. That's all there is to it. So as you can see, there's plenty of steam rolling for Linux gaming, and I think what's going to happen, probably by next year, is it will be the waking giant. What I'm referring to is kind of what JayzTwoCents was saying in his recent video. JayzTwoCents was talking about how AMD was the sleeping giant, and Intel made the mistake of overestimating or assuming that they couldn't achieve what they did today. Well, sure enough, it bit Intel in the ass, and Intel's now paying for it in market shares and other things. So I think the same thing is going to happen with Linux gaming, in that it's going to come around and Microsoft is going to have to deal with it one day or another. Let me go and talk about that. So there's been this big argument for a number of years that Linux gaming is never going to get the support it needs to be where it is. Well, I think that argument's pretty much defeated with not just the statistics that are up on the page, but also in the fact that we have companies investing in this. I think it's only a matter of time before we start seeing more and more of this. It's going to be a slow progression, but it's going to happen eventually. And let me give you some reasons outside of the companies and other things to kind of demonstrate this. So as it stands, the ecosystem for gaming, if you will, primarily focuses its attention on Windows and Mac. Well, the problem with Mac is it's more proprietary than Windows. You see, Windows, the only thing that's proprietary about it is the software. With Mac, it's also the hardware, because Mac has all this specific hardware that has to be put in place, and on top of that, it's got all the proprietary software layered on top of that. So there's a lot of things that's proprietary with Mac, more so than Windows. So see, Windows works with gaming because of many factors. One is the massive amount of support Microsoft has put behind it, but I would say another good reason too is that because the software is the only thing proprietary, there's no limitation on the hardware, like Mac is. Now enter Linux. Linux is open source, which means that companies are free to make modifications within reason, of course. There are going to be certain legal rules for how you handle proprietary software on open source software, but once you get around those legal boundaries, you're pretty much free to do whatever you need to. That's going to allow for a lot more integration than Microsoft could possibly, well, I should say Windows can possibly hope for. You see, the whole deal with proprietary software, at least on Microsoft's end, is that you have to make some sort of deal with them in order to implement whatever it is you're doing. But with open source, you really only have to worry about the legal things. You don't have to go through a company. And so here's a good example to show you that. There is a specific Linux distribution called Clear Linux. Clear Linux was developed by Intel. Intel developed it with its own technologies in there. Because Clear Linux has built-in Intel technologies, it allows Intel platforms to perform better on Clear Linux than any other Linux, and for that matter, Windows. You'll notice that in the tests. So Clear Linux is proof of what you can do, assuming that you have full access to the software. And I think the same thing is going to happen in a couple of years with Linux. That it's just going to be capable of handling that kind of integration, whether it be AMD, Intel, or Nvidia, or somebody else. Now, I will be fair, and let's talk about one hurdle that I can potentially foresee happening with Linux gaming. There is a lot of distributions out there for Linux. I obviously promote Manjaro because it's the most simplest to use, in my opinion, but as far as gaming on Linux is concerned, there are other ones that do pretty well. There's Budgie, I think is its name, something like that. It's got a sailboat for the logo, remember that. I can look at it in a Google search if need be, but you do have that. Pop! OS is the other one besides Manjaro that works pretty well. And I forget the other one's name, but those are the three primary ones that work with Linux. However, well, Linux gaming, but there's going to be a lot more Linux distributions than that. You have Linux Mint, you have Red Hat, SUSE, and the list goes on. So in order for Linux gaming to succeed, even with all the steam going behind it, it's going to need to figure out how to handle it. And I think the only way that's going to happen is if the Linux distributions reach an agreement and work together to create one Linux distribution specific to gaming. I think that if that's going to happen, it should be done with Plasma, and it should have Manjaro behind it as one of the Alliance members. Because Manjaro has done a really good job of allowing kernel updates separate from the driver updates and some other things that really do make it easy to get the latest software, not just drivers, but software in general. So I think that the Manjaro model should be followed to a certain degree. Maybe not 100%, but I would say a good chunk of it should be followed. And I think that, as I said, Plasma should be used with however they choose to implement that. Let me talk about why Plasma. Okay, so Plasma is the base layer, I guess you can say. It's as the easiest translation. But Plasma has Android communication through KDE Connect. That's the name of the software. The other reason, too, is because PlayStation happens to have Linux in it. How much of a percent of Linux it is, I don't know, but I am aware that Linux does exist on PlayStation. So Plasma would put this distribution in place to not only communicate with Android, but potentially PlayStation at a later date. People do play mobile games, so having the ability to work with Android would be really great. If they can work with PlayStation, such as crossplay or something, that would add to the sweetness of it. But yes, that is going to be the biggest hurdle and where I see things going. But one other thing too I would like to say before I close out is FidelityFX. So there's a technology coming out by AMD, which is going to be the competitor to Nvidia's technologies, and that's called FidelityFX. So the big news here is that it's open source, just like Linux is. That's a big deal because that means potentially people will be able to modify it and integrate it in different ways, just like Linux. Vulcan, which is the competitor to DirectX, is also open source to a certain degree. So I think what's going to happen is, assuming that we can get the distribution in place where we have one distribution for gaming, that we will also be seeing Vulcan and FidelityFX integrated into that distribution, because they are open source and it would be easy to make sure that they work the best with games. But either way, in summary, it's going to be a interesting year when we start seeing all this integration between DLSS and everything else. I'm going to do my best to continue educating people about Linux, well, Manjaro specifically, on this channel, and I hope one day that I can start getting people to actually play games on Manjaro. But that's all I have. Thanks for listening.